Melissa,
Sarah,
what are we reading today?
we're reading Good Material by Dolly Alderton.
Can't wait. Melissa, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Sarah. Had a big week, big discovery this week.
Oh boy, what was it?
I found 3 gray hair. And I couldn't believe it. Confession, I will, from time to time, spot a gray eyebrow. And I just remove that right away. They're very obvious, as plain as the nose on my face. And yeah, spotted these 3 gray hair. Now, my darling husband, Tom, claims he sees them all the time and just hasn't shared this with me.
Isn't that sweet?
Yeah. So I think I need to adjust my, I guess my hair coloring regime or just my temperament around it. I mean, does this bother you? I don't think of you as having gray hair. But are they hidden in there?
I definitely have gray hairs, and I talk about this a lot because I am kind of obsessed with aging, just because I feel like I have exponentially aged in the last 5 years of my life. And that may or may not coincide with the fact that I have a 5-year-old
Yeah.
child.
How old is your son, by the way? Yes, 5 years old.
But I really, truly feel like the combination of the lack of sleep, for one, just the stress of worrying about mothering a young child, as well as, just caring for another human being's every single need and want for 5 years. I'm aging like an old shoe at this point. And I work at a college. I mean, we both work in a, educational environment, and I see a lot of young people. And so when I go into the bathroom at work and I look in the mirror, and God forbid if there's a 20-year-old who is standing next to me at the sink and I'm looking in the mirror and it's just unfortunate lighting, I see every single line on my face, and I see every single gray hair that's popping out of my scalp. And then of course I'm glancing over and I'm looking at the smooth texture and poreless skin and the not even a hint of gray in these young people's hair. And it just makes me feel ancient. So that's a long, long way of saying I too have gray hair, but I do get my hair highlighted and kind of colored. And I think because I have lighter colored hair and highlights, that helps kind of mask them a little bit more.
I said that to Tom. I said, anything you've seen to date has really just been really light blonde. There's just no way it was white.
No.
Yeah, they feel wiry, and it was really not a great moment for me. And then it was boom, boom, boom. They were just right in a row, and it was just awful. But you and I talked about this recently, and it's exactly what you said about being in these environments where there's tons of young people. I have to remind myself too, they see a middle-aged woman when they see me, because we were talking about celebrity crushes, and I was like, man, every time I see Paul Mescal, I'm just like, man, he is the bee's knees. And that if he ever saw me, if he even his brain could compute my existence, he'd be like, well, there's somebody's lovely mom.
It's so true. It's so true. I do have to remind myself all the time that I am not in my 20s when I'm around young people and having conversations with young people, especially because they're looking at me in a totally different way. I'm literally from a different generation. They're the Gen Z, and I'm a elder millennial. You're firm millennial, I think.
I think I'm firm millennial.
I think I'm on that cusp. And my husband, who's just slightly older than me, is technically Gen X. And so he always teases me about that. And I'm like, we're not that far away from one another. And, with some of the books that we have read, that can kind of come into play too, would you say?
Oh, totally. And absolutely with this one. I really felt listening to some of the other commentary about this book afterwards, I was like, ooh, I'm the grown-up in the room here. And this book focuses predominantly on a male character. It is sort of the type of book that I've read a lot as a young person. And I was realizing that when you read male characters and you're not in a relationship, you're kind of crushing on the character maybe a little bit, or you're spending a lot of intimate time with this person. So it's you are kind of not dating them, but getting to know them in like an intimate way. Whereas, like, even though this character is actually not that much younger than me, definitely at a very different stage in his life, but I felt much more like a big sister. That I was like, oh, if I could talk to Andy, like, I just to give him some firm advice.
So the book that you were talking about is Good Material by Dolly Alderton.
Yes, yeah, and we'll probably talk a bit about this, but in my household, we started jokingly calling it really good material, actually, because this book overlaps a little bit, nay, a lot, with the book Really Good, actually, that you and I both read. I can give you a little summary, but there's an activity embedded in it. Do you want to play?
I would love to play.
So Good Material by Dolly Alderton is the story of Andy Dawson, and he's in his mid-30s, and it's the story of his experiences going through a breakup with Jen after a relationship of about 4 years. And honestly, he goes through the motions of a 30-something going through a breakup in the 2010s. Speaking of quintessential breakup stories in the 2010s, I'm going to list some plot points of Good Material, and I want you to tell me if you remember them being plot points of Really Good, actually.
Okay.
Andy moves home with a parent.
Yes.
Andy suffers through a failing career.
Definitely.
Andy does some binge drinking.
Oh, 100%.
Andy does a ton of compulsive social media research about the ex.
Oh, yes.
Andy has some stable friends who are peer contemporaries.
Uh-huh.
Andy has one super quirky and elderly companion as well.
Oh, definitely.
Yes. So with all of those plot points, we add in the stable friends, the quirky acquaintances for a little bit of contrast and charm. And it really is your classic breakup story, albeit told from the male perspective to give it a bit of difference. And this book comes to its real fruition when Andy, who is a stand-up comedian, finally takes the advice of people around him and processes his breakup by writing some good material about the relationship and its fallout for his stand-up routine.
And even in Really Good, actually, I mean, it's humorous, right? And like there's always an attempt by the main character who, of course, I want to say it's Monica, but it's not. That's the author of the book. What's the name of the character?
Maggie. I believe.
Oh, there we go. Maggie is like, she's funny and she's always trying to get a laugh out of people, like with her posts. So she's kind of in a weird way, kind of an adjacent type comedian as well. Like, even though she's not actually going up and doing stand-up, like she definitely is performing in a lot of ways in that book. And so I feel like that's maybe even like possibly another overlap between the two books.
I put some thought into that as well. And I was thinking that just in terms of building a character, having someone who is an academic is not completely unlike having someone who is like a struggling artist too, right? Because she was like early in like what can be a really competitive kind of like job market, and still that like urge to produce, but in a really insular way that ends up being really public. Like I saw a lot of connections there.
Yeah.
Do you tend to read the acknowledgments at the end of books?
I do. I tend to, just because it's a good way for me to like kind of get a little bit into the author and what their thought process was. And I'm hoping to get even like little hints about maybe lingering questions I might have.
I love to read the acknowledgments. I pretty much always do, just like you said, little Easter eggs. And the first quote I'm going to pull from this book is actually from the acknowledgments, where she says, "I spend most of my life texting 3 writers in an all-day back and forth about names, jokes, sex scenes, characters, and titles. Caroline O'Donoghue, Monica Heisey, and Lauren Benstead."
Well.
I literally wrote in the margin, what?
They are in communication with one another, literally, not just, maybe through their writing. So what was your kind of first impression of the main character, who I believe you said was Andy, like, and his kind of perspective on this whole breakup? And then do you see the two, him and his soon-to-be ex, together at the beginning? And does the breakup happen off page and it's now being referenced in past tense? Or do you kind of see them together and then they've broken up?
You come into the book and they're already split.
Okay.
And interestingly, I won't belabor this too much, but in the same way that Really Good
Right.
actually opens up with this list of why the relationship didn't work, it's a very similar type list. He opens with a list of all the reasons why he really shouldn't be with her, which we come to find out later was sort of like advice given to him because he is wrecked. Like the fact that he is not with this woman anymore is destroying him. And we get it all from his perspective of what has recently happened. I think that they had only broken up maybe a couple of weeks. It was like very recent. He's living with his mom now while they kind of get their affairs in order and he makes his next move. So really the majority of the perspective is from him. And then we're seeing her kind of through these rose-colored glasses, other than this list of annoying things that she did that starts out the book. Interestingly, Dolly Alderton gives the last 60 pages of this book to Jen. And I know a lot of people have absolutely loved this, that they feel like everything becomes clear once they start hearing her side of things. And I was just really disappointed that we spend, well over 200 pages getting to know Andy, kind of whether we're on team Andy or not. And then she hands over the last word of the book to the person who broke his heart. I just feel there's some value to like who gets the last word, not in a petty way, but in an artistic way to the book, right? Who gets to kind of leave the last lingering taste in my mouth, for lack of a better term. I couldn't think of anything better. But like, I couldn't believe that she was the one, that it was Jen who got these final words of the book.
Yeah, that is interesting. And, kind of returning to our continued conversation about like character growth, when you spend the bulk of a text with one specific character, some of the payoff often when you reach those final pages is that you've seen, again, some sort of growth or change or a resolution of some sort for them as a character, because you would hope that if you're spending an entire book reading about a specific character, you're invested in them and what their journey looks like. And so I would imagine that for that to kind of be taken away, like, do you feel like it's resolved by the time it gets to the part where Jen takes over?
Yeah, I definitely felt satisfied with where his journey went. Like there was definitely growth. There were like key moments where I was like, this is a turning point. He is seeing things clearly now and he's changing as a result. Like he's recognizing that he was not the best partner, but not in a way that he's not staying true to himself and who he is. So definitely felt satisfied with his growth. I can see how the book may have felt a little bit incomplete if there hadn't been more of Jen's voice present or available. But I just didn't like that it was just like tacked on with this chunk at the end where she sort of got to be like it felt like it was almost kind of not effacing him, but just sort of like, okay, whatever, that's what he thinks. Well, let me tell you what really went down. And it made me dislike her. Like there was a lot of moments in the book where I was like, I do hope they get back together. Like he's coming around, he's changing. But then when I learned things about her, I was like, I'm actually kind of glad that you're broken up. And actually, I can kind of like find a little spot here where I was really actively disliking her. But I probably need to give like a bit more context about Andy to kind of show why I was like feeling this sort of big sisterness about him.
Right.
Like he's nice, he's funny, he's charming, he's thoughtful. He was an only child to a single mom. Even that experience of growing up, like he would have been the center of the universe. Like that is hard to just suddenly not be. So he would have, I'm sure, been kind of a challenging partner just from that perspective. But he goes out of his way to be a really good friend to a lot of people who are important to him in his life. And so when we get her perspective, she basically runs through their entire 4-year relationship in these 60 pages. At this point in time, she's talking about when she's starting to feel like she doesn't want to be with him anymore. And frankly, a lot of it is just minutia. Like she's like, oh, he overeats and he's kind of annoying and sometimes he doesn't help with chores. And her friends are saying to her, welcome to being in a relationship. And I totally found myself saying that. It's like, well, did you ever tell him that? Like, did you ever say to him, I wish you would do X more. I wish you would do X less. Communicating to someone is a really important part of being in a relationship. And if you don't give them that, but still expect them to change, I think it's really unfair. She talks about like, she's thinking about possibly like, will I break up with this person? And she says, Sorry, there's a lot of the reason I'm hesitating here is because there's a lot of sexual language, and I'm like, how much of this do I want to be in the recording? But there's no way around it. And this is the
Yeah, it's
passage that I
happening.
picked. So here we go.
Dive right
Sorry,
in.
Mom. She says, every time we had sex, I wanted to cry afterwards because I wondered whether it would be the last time. And I hated that he had no idea I was having these thoughts. Every time we had sex, I was reminded of how well this person knew me, how comfortable I felt with him, and how purely and straightforwardly he loved me. I'm going to hit pause there. That's huge. You're in a relationship with someone and you're saying, he knows me so well, I'm so comfortable with him, and he loves me purely and straightforwardly. But yet you still want to break up with this person. Like
Mm,
reading that, I was like, I'm glad she's left him. He doesn't deserve
yeah.
that. So they go on this trip to Paris. And she says, by the time we got to Paris, I felt like our breakup was always on the tip of my tongue. I was nervous to get drunk or have sex or have any conversation about anything, worrying that I would blurt it out. I couldn't break up with him in Paris. I couldn't tarnish that city for both of us with the memory of our breakup. I just had to get through the trip, and then I talked to him about it when we got home. I am sorry, but like she is about to turn his world upside down. She's about to blindside him. Like he thinks I'm with this person who I love purely and straightforwardly. We are so comfortable together. They talk about having their own like culture as a relationship, which I thought was
Mm.
so lovely. And she's like, but God forbid I do it in Paris and tarnish the city for both of us. It just seemed like such a privileged and bitchy thing to do to him for like not a good enough reason.
Yeah, and, like, she holds all the power because, like, she knows something that he doesn't know, and, I mean, people break up in all sorts of different ways, but those kinda slow deaths of relationships, like, a lot of times one person kinda comes to the conclusion before the other and is kind of acting out, the remnants of a relationship and,
Mm.
like, looking further out, and that's what it sounds like for her.
And it's funny that you mentioned that power dynamic because in
Mm.
the book, I do really like her writing. Like, I think that she has a really nice way of illustrating things. Like, she creates some really cool imagery. So, like, the writing itself was really enjoyable, start to finish. And one of the ways that she illustrates those final days of a breakup is by talking about the flip. And she's talking about the power flip. And I could totally see this and relate to this in, like, my younger years of like, in the beginning, there's always someone who's like a little bit hungrier for the relationship, right? Like
Mm.
they'll do anything for the other person, like whatever movie you want to see, whatever restaurant you want to go to, they're, willing to pay for everything. Like they're the person who's sort of under the control of the other. And then
Mm.
eventually there's this switch where it's like the flip and power is how she illustrates like how things change. And then it ultimately results in a breakup.
Do you think it would have been better if the Jen part of it had been maybe, like, placed throughout? Maybe she got, like, every so many chapters or however it's divided, like, she gets, especially if it's about a specific act or scene or memory, like, he's sharing his perspective, and then you get a little chapter where you get her perspective on it, and then it goes back to him rather than it being all him and then her at the end. Do you think that would have been, like, a better
I
flow or
I totally do. And I wonder if that was like really questioned during the editing process because the way it's structured, there would have been so many great opportunities for that. Like she literally references exact moments throughout the book that they both have told us. You could have peppered them in to be like, this just happened from Andy's perspective, next chapter now, or even chapters later, but just not all as one big bulk of it.
Mm.
And they also have these common friends. So they met through their friends, Avi and Jane. And Avi and Jane are still together and they have this really comfortable, beautiful marriage. And so they're kind of like the conduit of some contact between Jen and Andy still. And I think that would have been like a great opportunity. Jen goes on a girls' weekend with Jane the same weekend that Avi and Andy are doing like a boys' night out. So there could have been more overlap just sooner, I think, as well. And it would have
Mm.
flowed really nicely.
And I don't know, I feel like by giving the last word essentially to her, like, you would expect is there some sort of, like, revelation that comes out of it?
Yeah, to me, it just felt like this addendum, almost like if it was like, you've probably been wondering what Jen was thinking, which
Well,
you
here it
are.
is. Yeah.
Well, I'll just tell you all at once, 4 years in a row in these 60 pages. But hearing how other women readers have responded to this, I am so in the minority here.
Mm.
Like some of the other readers were just like not even huge fans of the book until those last 60 pages, when suddenly they were like, it all made sense when I heard from Jen. But I think that these are people who are not counting the gray hairs on their when they're, getting ready for work in the morning. But I think that they're probably seeing themselves in Jen much more than
Mm.
I would. I'm not in that part of my life.
Yeah, kind of where we are in our lives when we're reading a book can really influence like how we do receive characters or how we relate to them, like, are they our avatar, in the story, and there is something to kind of being removed both from like an age perspective, however little difference, or being in a long-term relationship and the ups and downs of being in a relationship and the gives and takes and the nitpickiness, having to let things go. I think that when you're still kind of in that searching zone, things can be bigger, can make or break a relationship in a different way than when you've been in it for a while and you've kind of seen the big picture of it all. And so I could see how that would maybe put you in the minority in like looking at her character, because you can probably see both of their perspectives a little bit better, or at least see like that maybe what was being focused on is ultimately not, when you're in a long-term relationship, what ends up being the important thing.
Yeah, there was definitely an element of that. Sometimes I felt like she almost villainized people who were happy in their relationships.
Mm.
And I can completely understand that there are people who do not want to be in relationships and they are better on their own. And I am happy for those people if they make those choices for themselves. They're true to themselves to make those decisions. And again, if she truly wants to be alone, she should not be dragging someone else through the motions of a relationship, no matter how much that person loves her, because that's not fair to them. But many of us are just happy in relationships. Like I really do feel like that is what the greatest joy of my life is, being able to be part of a couple and part of a family. But one thing I thought this book did really nicely was talk about that shift happens kind of quickly when you're a young person. I often think about, when I was like, say like 22, 23, kind of a moment of transition in your life. What are you going to do? Carry on with school? Will you travel? Try to get a job? Da, 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 da. And everyone's telling you like, oh my gosh, the world is your oyster. You're so young. You're so young. And then like 2 years later, the same people are asking you about like your retirement plan. It's it's so amazing
Mm-hmm.
how fast it happens.
Yeah.
And then everyone starts pairing off, right? Like, and the marriages happen. And, if you invest time into a relationship and it doesn't work out, you only got older while you were investing into it. And so I really did feel for Andy in particular, who is very open about wanting to have a child, and probably given the fact that he had no relationship with his father, wanted sort of this nuclear family, and felt like I just blew my chance at that. And then
Mm.
he looks around at all of his buddies who are settling down. And there's this nice little passage, like suddenly he's single and he's 35. So all of the things that he wants to do as a single person, or he feels compelled to do as a single person, which he did as a younger single person, probably in a larger club of single buddies, he really can't do anymore.
Mm.
And so after like a night out with some friends, he says, when I get into my Uber a few minutes later, I see the time on my phone, 3:17 a.m. I look out the window onto the dark streets dotted with drunks shouting and crying and tripping over and calling people they shouldn't call and eating greasy food. Every good night out hinges on discontent. This is the theory that I've come to. When I go out with Abby and the boys, I notice that they're all too satisfied with their lives at home to have anything to really propel them forward into the night. Their sofas are too comfy, their wives are too warm, their on-demand television subscriptions are too innumerable. They're not searching for anything. They don't need to distract themselves from themselves.
Mm.
And so he feels like he's not part of any club anymore. And they all have this life that he wants and he was really close to having, but it's kind of been taken from him. I
feel
felt
for
for
him.
him. I know.
It's a tough age to be at, like early to mid 30s, because you are in this period of transition. And then there's like a societal expectation. And like you said, your peer group is kind of going through those changes. And to then suddenly be put back in a place that you didn't necessarily think you were going to be in, and kind of sticking out. Because I would even imagine like going out at that age, surrounded by, 26-year-olds, and you're the 30. It's just like, oh, Jesus, I don't belong here.
We're always reminiscing about our reunion, but we went
Mhm.
to like the bar that we always went to as students. And we were like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of students here. And one girl wouldn't stop dancing with us. And I kept saying, I think we remind her of her mother.
You made me laugh so hard when you said that. I know. And you know what? That particular place, I remember one of the last times that we were all there together, still as students, or at least like still firmly in our 20s. And like we didn't stick out there. We did look like we belonged. And I remember looking around and thinking, like, this is it. The next time you come back here, you will not belong here anymore. And you're going to know it. Enjoy this moment, because it's not going to last. It's a hard thing, not knowing where to go and how to kind of get to where you saw yourself going. That's a tough thing.
So there's a character, like a very, very minor character named John, who's sort of like part of his friend group, but like has no real discernible characteristics. John sort of requests this night out with the boys. He thinks, oh, John's going to tell us that he's getting married. But in fact, John tells them that he has separated from his long-term girlfriend. And so suddenly Andy's like, oh my gosh, I'm the expert on this. Like someone's crossing over into this experience with me. But this is an example of where it was kind of clear that there was a female writer attempting to get into the brain and psyche and inner monologue of a male. And there was a couple of examples of that, but this one kind of stands out like in a more dramatic way to me. So, he's there with John, and I think he feels this opportunity to like really connect with him, be like, okay, I can kind of impart some wisdom. So he asks John how he's doing. I don't think I've really processed it yet, John says. I feel like I'm in a dream or something. He shakes his body slightly as if he can get rid of his feeling like raindrops on a coat. And all I want to do is say, yes, I know. You poor, poor fucker. I am 4.5 months ahead of you on this expedition into hell, and I'm so sorry you're at the beginning of it. I don't envy you. Talk to me, cry to me, scream up at the sky, curl up like a baby. Let me help you and console you and tell you all the ways I've gone completely fucking mad since Jen left. Let me reveal every thought and feeling I've kept from all of you. I know what you're feeling, and while I don't know yet that it gets better, I do know you're not alone. I promise you're not alone. That is not the way I
No.
expect a man
No.
to, even though it's his inner monologue,
Yeah.
and he's saying, oh, I wish I could, because he says, instead, it is agreed that the next logical step is to order a round of shots called a cement mixer. That seems logical to me.
Yeah.
But I just don't know this whole let me hold you and scream at the sky.
Cry and yeah, not to deny that men obviously have strong emotions and feel sadness, because of course they do, but like to be so dramatic about it doesn't seem like that he would have those words. More like welcome to hell, brother, but not like you can cry out to the sky and I will hold your quivering body.
And again, I do believe it's entirely social, but that social piece of it is so strong. Like, I just don't feel like men are socialized to even have these thoughts. I agree with the fact that she suggests, like, he never actually said that because that would break lots of social norms.
Right.
But I actually think he would be so socialized to just not even feel those feelings because they would just be so frowned upon.
Right.
Or just like misunderstood, like misreceived or something, that no one would know what to do with him with that emotion. But we have poor understandings of each other as genders, I think.
I think
And
so too.
I was thinking, obviously, I've been thinking a lot about this book in anticipation of this conversation. And this was one of the things that really stood out to me, this gap in terms of like, how does a woman write a male inner voice too? Not just like a male character, of male inner voice. And last night we had some friends over and, we did this sort of thing where the girls are in one room and the boys are in the other room. And it had even divided amongst the kids. The boys were in the basement playing hockey and the girls were upstairs setting up a spa. and then of course they invite the moms upstairs, so it's all the moms and all the girls were doing the spa thing. It was adorable. And one of the girls, she's 8 years old, she's like, I wonder what the boys are doing. And then she goes, probably just boy stuff, like drinking Bud Lights and swearing. And I was like, were you a consultant on Dolly Alderton's good material book for male behavior? But this is how reductive our understanding of what each other are at. And I know obviously she's a kid, but it was like, it just reminded me of all of this.
Oh, totally. Were you convinced? I mean, I know these scenes, like that particular scene was not necessarily like convincing. It kind of stuck out a little bit, but
obviously you're more critical of it, right? Like when you see the name and then you understand the premise of the book, like you're kind of looking for it a bit more. But I also wondered about the double standard of it all too, right? I think that if I found out that a man had wrote a breakup book from a woman's perspective, I feel like there would be an outcry. Like people would be like, how dare you?
Dare he?
Right? Like you cannot even pretend to know this. But really, and this is my cynic, and I feel bad sometimes like just having this kind of an approach to things, but Dolly Alderton has been very successful with her writing, both fiction and nonfiction. She has a following, right? Like she has a group of people who are keen, like what is the next thing that's going to come out? And I'm sure she struggled with how do I keep up with my own success? So I think that she probably felt pressure to do something a little bit different. And then there would be this little bit more of like a sales pitch around, well, is this just another breakup book? Because as we talked about before with other books, the minute you write like a quirky female character who's single in her 30s, oh, it's Bridget Jones. She needed to kind of be outside of that model. And I think this is where she landed with what to do with it. So I do think it's a book that's targeted to women. This is not a book that anyone has ever expected a large group of men to read. So it felt a little bit contrived and then deliberately targeted to a female audience. So I almost felt like it was like, I'll tell them what they want to hear. We want to think that when they're dumped, they just implode and they're devastated. And even though they don't post song lyrics on their Instagram pages or whatever, they're still miserable. They just don't know how to express it.
I could see from like that kind of commercial standpoint of like, okay, what's gonna set this book apart? What's gonna sell it? And that could feel maybe a little not icky. That's like such a lame word, but like that you kind of feel like a little pandered to, I suppose.
Yeah, it was just sort of like, so was this just like a bit of a gimmick to set it apart from other books so that it would have a selling point, right? Like what will the critics talk about? How will we pitch it? So it's not just one of another existing large group of stories.
So I feel like this might be a good time for me to ask you, Melissa, is Good Material by Dolly Alderton a could read, a should read, or a must read?
I think that this book is a should read.
Oh, I actually really thought it was going to be could read.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't, maybe I was holding my cards too close to my chest. Yeah. Why did you think I would go could?
Well, I thought because of that whole idea of like maybe pandering and the Jen part being the tail end and maybe this idea of him, not being a realistic portrayal of a man in a breakup.
So maybe I probably focused a little bit too much on my reading of those last 60 pages, but proportionately speaking, I spent way more time with Andy, who, maybe a bit annoying, but I did, like I said, kind of felt like I was like his big sister, kind of listening. And then when he would do things that were really kind for people, like he goes to Avi's kid's birthday party and like dresses up like a superhero and plays with the kids. And he's got this really quirky guy that he ends up living with. Like he doesn't want to be a housemate to like a pensioner in his 30s, but that's where he is. But he does lots of really kind things for that person, like make sure he's not alone for Christmas. And so like I liked him as a character, and ultimately I spent more time with him. I was critical of that last part, but overall, I felt like the book was fun, it was engaging, it was entertaining, and it was the type of book that I wondered what they were up to when I wasn't reading it. Like I was like, "Oh, I wonder what's going to happen next."
That's always a
And
good sign.
yeah, totally. Like I would reach for the book instead of the opposite. And I actually feel like just the writing was good. It wasn't spectacular, but the pacing was nice. Like anytime I kind of felt like, okay, we need to switch it up a little bit, it's like I would turn the page and it would be like we've switched cities where something new has happened, like the direction would move. So the pacing was really nice. And just on a really basic level, she had some nice images that I think will stick with me. I did read one just unintentionally earlier, but she talked about trying to shake a feeling like raindrops on a coat or something. And
I
was
like that. I thought, oh, that's a
yeah,
cool image.
like, so that'll stay with me. Like those little writing nuggets were good enough to give it a should read. Definitely.
Well, I'm happy it is a should read, and maybe I will read it because I do love a good breakup book, especially when people are a mess and and that there can be humor in it. I really enjoy that. And I am really interested, like when we have this episode out, our 3 male listeners, if they could comment on their idea of, either their perspective of like how we looked at Andy's expression of like camaraderie and like kinship to this other person who just went through a breakup and how he wanted to hold him as he wept. So for the few of you that are out there.
Yeah, we're looking at you.
I hope Tom Halford.
Yeah. I hope you feel seen. All of those listeners went to grad school with us.
Pretty much. Well, this was fun. It's always such a blast to chat with you. And I look forward to our next episode where we will welcome our second guest.
I wonder how many more gray hair I'll have by then.
Oh my, I know. You and me both, sister.
Yes. But you know who will be fresh as a daisy is Kate Cartmel.
Yeah, she certainly will be. And she'll have some really lovely perspectives.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this.
Thank you. And until next time, my friend.
Until next time.
Toodaloo.